And yeah, without further ado, let's get started. So we already said in the chat, you can let us know in the chat what you need the most help with, but I'd also like to go ahead and launch a poll. If you just want to let us know what best describes you. Are you a student, a parent? It's just helpful for us to know. Usually for like a law school admissions webinar, we're talking mostly to students versus our undergrads. More parents will come, but either way, we're happy to have you. We're happy to answer your questions. And just some housekeeping. So like a quick summary of our little buttons we have. The chat, we can use that. You can use that for asking any comments, replying to any questions we have. We give you the raise your hand. We don't use that feature. If you have questions for us, we're going to answer those at the end. So we prefer you put those questions into the Q&A box. That just helps us keep everything organized and then ensures we're not going to miss your questions. And then we have the closed captions button if you want to get captions for this webinar. And we also have translations. So if you're familiar with a different language, I see someone who's already enabled that. Awesome. You just have to have the most updated version of Zoom. So perfect. I'd love to see that's working. I'll go ahead and pass it to Lauren quickly so she can introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be with you this evening. I work as a former admissions officer with Ingenious Prep. And I came into that role after serving for 5 years as the assistant director of admissions at Notre Dame Law School. So that was a really holistic admissions opportunity. I was working with recruiting students and traveling and meeting students at law fairs all across the US. I was reading and making decisions on applications, serving as a decision maker on our admissions committee, and then also working with students after decisions have been made, balancing scholarship questions, wait lists, where to go, how to transition. So it was a really, I think, well-rounded experience in admissions, and I've continued to work as an outside reader for Notre Dame for many years since I departed that position. I've been in higher education, though, for over 15 years, working with students in various academic and career counseling positions, and really just love working with students to help them reach their full potential with what they're doing in their education. I'm coming to you tonight from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So I'm currently working as a senior advisor doing academic and career counseling in the Honors College at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And I look forward to speaking with you all and answering all of your questions. So please put them in the Q&A so we can make sure that you leave with all of your questions answered.
And my background, not so interesting as Lauren. I'm really just here to like press the buttons for her. But I am Ellen Murray. I'm the senior social media manager. So if you get emails, they're probably from me. Sorry. And I went to the University of Southern California. So let's continue. So we introduced ourselves, but I'm going to quickly introduce Ingenious Prep just so you understand who we are, where we're coming from. And then I'll also kind of briefly talk about some admissions data and how applications are processed so that we're all on the same page about like the foundations of the admissions process for law school. And then Lauren's going to come in with her wonderful specific JD admissions officer experience, and she's going to talk about the 4 critical factors in standing out in the law school admissions process and how to apply these lessons to your profile, specifically thinking about extracurriculars. So who are we? Who's Ingenious Prep? We're, of course, our counselors like Lauren, so over 150 former admissions officers, over 75 graduate coaches from top schools. And our network also includes top university professors, researchers, business leaders. And through them, we've been able to kind of leverage insights from all these schools and build them into a curriculum for our students. And our results kind of speak for themselves. So acceptances at every top law school, Yale, Harvard, Stanford, etc. And of course, we have some little star photos for all our counselors. But let's talk admissions data. So let's see. As of January 31st, you see there had been this very large number of applications submitted from all these applicants. And when we're thinking fall 2022, Harvard only gave 822 acceptance letters out of those 8,000 applicants. So it's kind of like an obvious conclusion. Lots of admissions, like lots of applicants, lots of applications, not as lots of spots, so low acceptance rates. But with that in mind, true or false, a little question for you guys. Schools have an algorithm to determine who is accepted and who is rejected. And you can put that in the chat or You can scream the answer to your living room. You can say it silently in your head. You can send it to me like psychically. True, false. Okay, so we have some contention. I like that. That's fun. The answer is actually false. So most elite schools are using this process of holistic review. So an individual admissions officer like Lauren is assessing every part of your application. They're not using AI. We get that question a lot, especially for undergraduate admissions. No schools are using AI yet to make these decisions. So then how are applications processed in the admissions office? So you submit your application, you're relieved, you're done. It goes to admissions officer. They've got a pile, thousands of applications, thousands of pages. Usually those are separated by region. The admissions officer is going to read through all of them. They're going to decide who they want to accept, who they want to reject. They're going to discuss it in a committee, and them and the dean of admissions are going to make a final decision about who they're going to accept, who they want in this law school class. So another true or false question. Most law school candidates apply directly from college for law school. So is that, what do you think? People are like 22, right out of college, going right into law school, or do you think they're taking a gap year? False, false. Correct. So most applicants have 1 to 2 years of work experience before going to law school. Oh, another true or false question, very fun. It's like Jeopardy. Law school applicants are expected to have a deep knowledge of the law before they're admitted. And once again, that's a true or false. What do you think? False. Okay, you guys, you're on a record. That is correct. That is false. So law school is actually one of the only graduate programs where you're not expected to have prior knowledge in the field. Rather, in the application, admissions officers are assessing for reading skills, writing skills, critical thinking skills. So our takeaway is that as an applicant, it's key that you're making an impression on the admissions officer. One of the ways that you're going to make an impression, that you're going to showcase your personality, is through your extracurriculars, your activities, your resume. So I'm going to pass it on to Lauren, and we're going to talk what does it actually mean to stand out in those ways.
Yeah, thanks, Ellen. I think the first thing that I want to start by trying to impress on everyone is when an admissions officer starts reading the application, they are looking for the reasons to admit you. They are not reading your application looking for reasons to reject you. And I think that's a really important mindset to just keep in mind and to take into your application process. You have to do a good job of telling them why they should admit you, because that is what they are looking for. They are looking for all the positive indicators that you are ready and you are going to contribute to that legal community. The other piece I want you to keep in mind when we talk about all the different slides we're going to talk about today is choosing a law school is in some ways, and similar to really any professional school, is a little bit different than choosing an undergrad. You are really choosing a professional community to be connected to for the duration of what is hopefully a really fruitful career. We're thinking about alumni networks, we're thinking about continuing education. So with a professional school, like, you really do need to be making a really intentional choice. And you want the law school to make an intentional choice as well. You want your colleagues, your professional associations to be cut from a similar cloth and to have really high ethics and aspirations as well. So I think it's just really important to think about kind of the bigger scope, the bigger picture about the application. So let's start digging into those critical factors. So when you think about the 4 critical factors in standing out, there's of course your GPA and your test scores. And we're going to talk a little bit about, grades and scores and how we break that down, how we look at it. And then the application is really what personalizes the application. That's what really gives the admissions officer a sense of who you are. And tonight we're going to talk about leadership and diversity, direction and fit, and then a theme or an application persona as really kind of ways to highlight that information. Again, something to think about kind of throughout the presentation. What information can you control? what information is known, it's not changing, and what information can you control, and how are you presenting that? So for example, when we think about GPAs and test scores, which we're going to dive into first, your GPA, maybe you graduated several years ago. Maybe that is known, like that's not changing. We're not going to put a lot of time and effort into that. We want to think about, okay, knowing what the GPA is, how do we put our time and energy into the other aspects that help you stand out and help you be a successful candidate? Because, you know, that's a known quantity. Or are you a current student and that GPA is still very much in flux? How do you then approach that? How do you approach your final semester to make sure that you end strong and you know, continue to convey that you're a committed student? So again, just a single example, but we really want to think about how to best use your time and your energy as you move through the application process. So let's move to threshold grades and test scores. I honestly hate when people ask about cutoffs and whatnot when it comes to GPA and test scores. But at the same time, you know, schools are looking, they're using it as a benchmark, right? To get a sense for, you know, how successful someone is going to be. So they're read as a part of your application, but I think the key is that there's always exceptions. Schools, you know, publish their medians. They also publish the 25th and 75th percentiles. And there are always going to be students that are admitted above and below because their application does a really fantastic job in those other critical areas of really highlighting why that person is going to be successful. There are many applicants with amazing scores that are rejected because the only real positive they have going for them is their scores. And I can tell you, as someone who's read a lot of applications, you can really sense when someone is just resting on the fact that they were clearly a strong student and they're clearly a good test taker. Their applications sometimes feel like they rushed through the writing component. They maybe didn't do as much in their college or in their professional experiences because they were just good and they didn't really spend a lot of time building up other experiences. They tend to just fall a little bit flat. I would be more apt as a reader to take a chance on a lower score that was impressive in other aspects of their application than to just rest on someone who had really high scores. Now, that's my personal view as a reader. There are definitely going to be people in the reading role that disagree with that. But just keep in mind that they really are just read as a piece of that application. I think where things can get challenging for students is when they fall into what we call the splitter role, meaning they have a high LSAT, so at the median or higher for the schools that they're applying, and a low GPA, so below that median, or vice versa, a high GPA and a low LSAT. There is definitely room for these students, but I do think that it's important that you help the school see what your value is, like what do you bring? And GPA is probably the more challenging splitter if you are a current student. Because if you are a current student, your GPA is still changing. I can't tell you how many students I, admitted and they were above the median and then they graduated and maybe they had a case of senioritis and suddenly their GPA was not above the median. Like that is still a factor that is very much in flux. And I am typically less willing to take a risk on a GPA right at that mark because I don't know where it's going to end if the student is currently in school, than I am with an LSAT where I know that the student has taken the test. I know if they're registered for future exams. And again, it's just kind of what's the known quantity and what isn't. But when you're thinking about schools that you're applying to, I think it's important that you look at schools where you're balancing that list. You want to have some schools that are safety schools where you feel like based on your LSAT and your GPA profile, again, knowing that it's just a single factor, but based predominantly on that profile, it feels like a safe school where your likelihood of admission is higher You want to have some target schools where you're kind of targeting right around those medians. And then you do want to have some reach schools for balance, because like I said, there are going to be folks outside of those medians that are admitted and that have a very strong profile. Ellen had shared that applications are up. They are way up. It's competitive, and that's pretty normal, particularly when you're looking at the economy and the pandemic. Like, those are all really normal, natural responses to what we're seeing in our world right now. But that just puts more onus on you to really project why you're a strong applicant beyond just simply what the numbers project. Because if you remember, LSAT is projecting your first year success. Now, we know through a lot of research that first year success is often very tied into long-term success in the legal career or in the legal industry, but the LSAT is just designed to project just that. And there's a lot of other ways to indicate whether someone is going to be successful or not. The GRE and the GMAT are also kind of trending up in the law school world. The GRE more than the GMAT. And a lot of schools are beginning to accept these. And it really, I think, does open up the accessibility of applying to law school, which is really fantastic. The GRE and the LSAT are definitely different exams. And it has brought in a lot of students from really fantastic academic backgrounds into the legal field, which is fantastic. Thinking a little bit more about the GRE, a lot of top schools are accepting it. What I think is important to know about the GRE is if you choose to go that route, one, certainly make sure that the schools you are planning to apply to that are on your school list are accepting it. So that way you don't put yourself in the position of needing the GRE and the LSAT, unless for whatever reason that is preferable to you. But know that what the schools are going to do is when they get your score, they're often going to look at the verbal, they're going to look at the quantitative, and there are algorithms that then tell me if this is your verbal and this is your quantitative, this would be your projected LSAT score. And that's often what schools are looking at when balancing an applicant that has a GRE versus an applicant that has an LSAT. So they're looking at that information to try to compare apples and oranges in a somewhat consistent way. Similarly, schools are going to use your top LSAT score. They're also going to take your top sub score in verbal and quantitative as well. GMAT is a lot newer and not a lot of schools are accepting it. If you are in a position, and this is going to be a fairly niche group of people, but if you're in a position where you want to pursue a JD MBA dual degree, which is one of the more popular dual degrees that is out there, it's definitely worth having a conversation with both admissions offices on what is the acceptable entrance exam. Will the MBA school accept the LSAT? Will the law school accept the GMAT? You just want to use your time and your energy and your money wisely, and it does not hurt you to ask. It never hurts to ask about this. So, I mean, I really think the big takeaway here is that, you know, being a strong test taker and having a great GPA is fantastic. I don't want to knock that in the slightest, but it's not enough to guarantee admission. It's really just one of many important factors that help project your ability to be successful. So you just don't want to rest on your laurels. I also want to encourage students, if you feel maybe a little disgruntled or a little down, feeling like I'm not the strongest test taker, or, you know, I am a good student, but, you know, the pandemic was really hard for me and my GPA took a dive, or can't tell you how many times I've heard this one. I started as pre-med and then a year and a half into college realized that's not for me. And that was after maybe some not great, scores in science classes, and your GPA took a hit and you're feeling like, man, that's going to really hamper me from being competitive. Maybe, but maybe not. I wouldn't let that really get you down. Okay, let's move on to diversity and leadership. And And we're going to talk much more specifically about the concept of an application persona, but really that starts now, right? Like we're going to talk about diversity and leadership. We're going to talk about extracurriculars. We're going to talk about, ways that you are, you showcase, your fit for different schools. But I do think it's important to keep this mindset of how do I have a consistent message throughout my application? So we're going to talk about that application persona in a little bit, but I want you to kind of even start thinking about it now. So diversity is really important. Law schools want really diverse classes, but I want you to start by thinking about diversity from, a really broad perspective. It really is what makes you stand out, what is unique about your background, your contribution, and what allows you to have a unique perspective in that classroom. So, there's many different kinds of examples of diversity. There's certainly going to be, the kind of diversity that you don't really control, race, ethnicity, things on that nature, but also work experience and your foreign languages you speak, where you've lived, achievements you've had. One of the students that I work with now is thinking about, she's balancing a variety of different professional school options in her future, but she shoots air rifles and competes nationally and is trying to get on the Olympic team, super unique, not a common achievement. And so we have already spoken about that is something that is really going to make her stand out. Right. And I'm not saying go pick up some really obscure hobby just to stand out, but those are the kinds of things that sometimes when I'm talking with students and asking them, well, what's unique about you? Tell me about what you're involved with. I often get met by students saying oh, well, there's nothing really that special about me. But to someone who doesn't know you, so many different factors about your background and your lived experiences might be really unique and might really set you apart. So I think it's really helpful to try to keep a broad perspective again here. Work experiences, activities you're a part of, those are all different examples of things that might make you a really unique candidate. Leadership is really important as well. And it's important that you demonstrate, leadership on your application. Lawyers, I'm not going to say universally are good leaders. That's not a fair statement to say, but law schools are looking for folks that embody, I think, strong leadership skills and potential. They are looking for folks that often can command a room, are good with their words, are folks that are strong in their ethics and their opinions. So, I think there's a lot of different ways we can slice and dice this because leadership doesn't have to just mean you were the president or the vice president of something. It really comes down to the different experiences that you had in your actions. When we think about how you might showcase this in your application, your actions could really be highlighted in your resume. That might be really focusing on those active verbs when you're describing experiences that you had. It might also be something that you talk about in your personal statement. Maybe we go through and we think about a more singular experience and use that as an opportunity to highlight one of these leadership experiences. You don't want your personal statement to rehash your resume, but if there's something specific that we want to draw attention to, that might be something to do. And then also remember, impact is more important than title. Again, like I said, you don't have to be the president to have made an impact. But this is, I think, a nice opportunity to remember quality over quantity when it comes to how you spend your time in whether it be leadership positions or extracurricular opportunities. I would much rather see someone that has deep and consistent involvement than someone who has just kind of surface level experience, but maybe in more organizations. So really thinking about that as well. Okay, let's transition into the direction and fit. So really thinking first about why do you want to go to law school, right? So before you start working on the application, I would encourage you to ask yourself, why do you want to go? Things that we don't want to tell them are listed below. I don't want to say that being a lawyer is not a financially lucrative career, because for some people it is. Doesn't have to be, right? God bless our, public servants and public defenders and some of the people in that field. But for some of our folks, like going into, big law and whatnot, you might be making a lot of money, and that might be a motivating factor. What law schools don't want to read about is that being the only motivating factor for you. And I can tell you, I've definitely read applications where you can tell that their entry into law is really a financial decision versus be feeling passionate about the law or the career path that they can go into. You don't have to have tons of legal experience to go into law school, right? That was one of the things that Ellen asked previously. You don't have to really know much about the law. So as we think about some of these, fitness and direction and whatnot that you're going in, the other factor that I tend to think is if you don't have a resume or a application that just screams, I've been preparing to go to law school, that's really where we want to think about how do we convey this concept of fit and this concept of why law, because it might not be as apparent. So some good reasons for why you want to go to law school is thinking about professional and personal goals. And let me also add, it's okay if those goals shift. A lot of students will ask questions, particularly when it comes to the personal statement. And they're like, well, I feel like I should tell them like exactly what I want to do with my law career. Well, if you know that's okay to tell them, but it's also okay to tell them if you think you know, and then your plans change. That's okay. It's like going to college and changing your major, or, starting medical school thinking you want to be one kind of doctor and then switching specialties. Like that's allowed. It's okay. But it is important to have a clear vision of why law, even if the specific goal changes. It's also okay to know that you just want to go to law school and you're not really sure how you want to practice law or how you want to utilize your JD. Please also keep in mind that personal statements are not statements of purpose. So you don't have to go specifically into this aspect if you're not at a point where you're ready to do so. It's also important to really think about asking yourself some of these questions to help you process and really think through, why do you want to be a lawyer? What sparked that interest? How has it evolved? What are any of your concerns? Why do you think you'll be a good lawyer? I think these can just be really helpful questions as you are, processing why law and kind of putting together what you want to do. The other piece to think about is specifically with the fit for why this law school. So you're going to apply to multiple law schools. I don't know that I've ever really worked with students who are applying to a single law school. I don't know that I would recommend that. You're probably going to want to apply to a handful at least. So why do you want to go to this specific law school? So really thinking about that law school's culture, thinking about their academic specialties. Maybe that means digging into some of their experiential learning opportunities or the research that their faculty are doing. Thinking not only about geography, where are they located, but where are their graduates going? What kind of work are their graduates doing? Are they mostly going into public law? Are they going into big law? Are they going into clerkships? What do you want to do when you're done? Where do you want to be? What does their alumni network look like? You want to think really holistically about that, because again, you're making a decision that's really not just for 3 years. It's really for your whole career. But think about, how do you gain that information, right? Do you gain that information by visiting? Do you gain that information by researching their website, by talking to alumni, by talking with faculty, by talking with current students? there's a lot of different ways that you can get that information, first and secondhand information. The other piece I'll just say quickly is when you're thinking about why a certain law school, you want to be mindful of not only what you want from that law school, but what you will bring to that law school. I'm thinking specifically about the like optional YX statements. Don't just use those statements to tell the law school about all the cool things they have going for them. They already know. They want to know specifically why you want to connect with those, but then also think about taking it a step further. What can you bring to that as well? Okay, so how do you demonstrate that fit? So that was one example, but show genuine interest. Do your due diligence. That's kind of a tongue twister. Learn those details, and then again, make the connection about how you will contribute, not just how you will benefit. They want to know both, but really thinking specifically about how you will, bring something unique. Again, going back to that idea of diversity to their community. Okay. Transitioning a little bit into applying this to that extracurricular profile and really just overall strengthening. I love on this next slide, the quote by Gene Webb. I really love like the last sentence. Perfect test scores and grades are not enough. The student's application itself needs to be spectacular. Not to put more pressure on you, but that application really should be just this perfect document. You really want to highlight your uniqueness, your strengths, and this is where that concept of application persona, I think, can really weave a very cohesive statement. I sometimes, when I'm working with students on their personal statement, will encourage them to give it to someone like who maybe doesn't know them quite as well, and have them ask that person, like, what are 3 words you would use to describe me based on reading this? Like, or what is one thing that you take away? And if that isn't the core message of what you want your application to say to the reader, then we're missing the mark and we need to shift somehow. We need to make some edits. So it really does. You just need to not rest on those laurels with GPA and test scores. And again, really think about that whole application. So how to stand out in your extracurriculars. So ideally, right, you're demonstrating your interest in law through your activities. But really more than anything, we want your activities to demonstrate transferable skills to law school. So that can come in a lot of different ways. That can be research, that can be presentation or speaking, that can be writing, that can be advocacy. So maybe you do theater. That's a great way to showcase that presence and that ability to speak in front of others. Maybe you work for a literary magazine or your school paper. Those aren't necessarily legally oriented, but they have a great connection with transferable skills. There's a lot of other common ways, and that doesn't mean bad ways to get that legal experience, but I always like to impress upon students because sometimes they get really anxious, like I didn't do some of the quote unquote typical things to prepare for law school. That is okay. Focus on the transferability of what you did. Now, that said, if you have the ability to go get some legally related experience, always helpful because it shows your commitment to the profession. It's also a fantastic way for you to affirm, yes, I do want to go spend 3 years of my time and a whole heck of a lot of my money in securing this JD degree. Like, this is the right path for me. So those experiences can be super helpful in that aspect as well. Here are some really common law school experiences. So debate, mock trial, pre-law societies, Phi Alpha Delta is a common one, but doesn't have to be PAD. Student government experiences, paralegal, choosing topics. If your school has a, like a pre-law organization or pre-law track, I've seen that a lot, although there is no one academic way to get to law school. And on that quick note, even though it's not extracurricular about academics, I get this question all the time. Should I choose poli-sci? Should I choose English? Should I choose the major that is going to allow you to be the most successful and that you're really excited about. Of course, you want to, again, have the transferable skills of reading, writing, critical thinking, speaking, analyzing. Those are all very important skills. You can get that from a lot of academic backgrounds. And sometimes having a unique academic background is maybe the piece about you that makes you diverse. So don't feel like you have to be pigeonholed in a certain academic program in addition to specific extracurriculars. The one that isn't on there, though, that I would add is community involvement. I think that is something that a lot of law schools look for, would just be like involvement and connection to your community. Maybe that looks like volunteering. Maybe that looks like working on, different political campaigns. Maybe that looks like picking up trash. Like there's a lot of different ways you can show that commitment to community. And I think that is something that a lot of schools really value. So some extracurriculars that help you stand out. And these can come in a lot of different disciplines, but anytime you do things like research, thesis, that really kind of the depth of knowledge, depth of time, reading, writing, researching, analyzing, that's a fantastic skill set to translate into law school. And so there's really great opportunities there. Anything that shows initiative. So in this instance, the example is starting your own organization, but honestly, anything on your resume that can show kind of that initiative is, I think, a really great kind of personality trait to highlight for a law school application. Clearly, if you've been published or if you have presented at conferences, or you have contributed to anything in that regard, that is fantastic. A lot of schools will have like symposiums or undergraduate research type opportunities. Those are great ways to get involved. And then of course, seeking a job or an internship that's going to build those skills is a fantastic way. I can't tell you though how many students that I work with, specifically at the campus I currently work on. We have a really high first generation, like we're 40% first gen. The amount of hours my students work just blow me away. Like they work so hard. So for some of our students, they might say I have to have this job. Like I'm a DoorDash driver, or I work, as a security guard, or I'm doing this or that, and I feel like that is taking up a lot of my time. Those are not bad job experiences. Students that balance that with strong academic performance, that also sends a message and sends a positive connotation about that person's ability to prioritize and work and balance. I will say if you're an athlete, certainly an NCAA athlete, or also even if you're doing like a club sport, balancing athletic commitments with academics is also something that I think can help students stand out and can be, really positive. So ways to build your profile. I mean, I think this works, kind of hand in hand with the screen that we were just looking at. Look for those opportunities, submit for a publication, really think about like, how can I get involved with an organization in a more deeply level? Can I start an organization? Initiate creative projects, seek internships or experiences, paid, unpaid, volunteer, present if you can. And I think, the next slide kind of goes along with this concept of a remote internship. Think broadly about the scope of where and how you can do this. I think if we can take away something positive from the pandemic, it's that there's a lot of online resources that can help us connect with others where geography may have previously been a challenge, or, it might have allowed organizations to think more creatively about how they pull in interns or staff. So, I think there's a lot of opportunity to really think about kind of online resources and ways to get involved. So Ellen, if we can skip forward to the gap year here. So things to think about before taking a gap year. So we have another true and false question for you. Most law school candidates apply directly from college for law school. We kind of talked a little bit about this at the very beginning, and I should pull the chat up. So I think I'm seeing false. Yes. Yes. So that is false. Thank you for participating. The average age is 24. Admission is competitive. So some students really use time after college to continue to build that profile. Others feel really prepared to go right away. And we can talk about the pluses and minuses to that, but the average age is 24. And I think at some law schools, you might even find that it's more than that. There are definitely going to be some programs out there that really value the professional experience. So it's definitely okay to take a gap year. And there's a lot of pros and cons that you might weigh. So some things to balance. If you're feeling like burned out and you need time, take time, because you're not going to get that time in law school, and you're definitely not going to get it out of law school. That said, if you feel really, really ready and you just are excited to get started, then great. That might really mean that it is a good opportunity for you to dive right in. If you feel like you need work experience or any other sort of extracurricular experiences, then it is a good idea to use that time to build up your application. Don't feel like you have to be rushed, to dive in. Some other pros is if from an LSAT, GMAT, GRE perspective, you really want to work on the test scores, especially if you're trying to offset maybe a concerning GPA, give yourself the adequate time to study and prepare. And, we're still in a really competitive application cycle. And a lot of that is connected into the economy, into the pandemic. So if you're in a position where not going right away is an okay choice for you, that might be a consideration based on, the competitiveness and where you see yourself going. For some other folks, some students are really just gung-ho to dive into that career, and that's okay too. Don't feel like you need to go right away. I do want to make one comment, and this was something that surprised me when I was working in law school admissions, is that we would often have really eager students that were graduated school, like college, in 3 years, and then they were going straight into law school. That is okay. There is nothing wrong with that. That said, some of those students did not spend a lot of time on their extracurricular profile because they were taking super heavy course loads. They were taking courses during the summer, and they were just very swift the way they moved through. That you need to have a strong academic background in addition to an extracurricular profile to be a really competitive applicant, because there is a bit of a translation to how that then translates into 1L summer job success. So not only do you want to be successful in the classroom, but when you're applying for 1L summer jobs, those interviewers are also looking for what other kinds of jobs and extracurriculars have you done. And if you don't spend any time building up that piece of your profile, then again, you're just kind of resting on your laurels of being a really strong student. And so that is something that surprised me. That was new to me when I entered into law school admissions, is that sometimes those students ended up with a bit of a struggle there. The other piece is that they're then graduating law school at a younger age. And depending on the type of law they're going into, sometimes firms were hesitant when someone was really, really young. So I'm definitely not trying to be ageism or anything along those lines, but just for someone just to kind of balance that perspective when they're thinking about their application timeline and how they're going to move through. So here are some things that you might want to take advantage of in a gap year. I think the biggest one that I usually say to students is work in a legal setting to get the experience. Again, you don't have to have it to go to law school, but it's really helpful and it should hopefully affirm. The other one that I tend to recommend a lot is travel or check off a bucket item. You're probably not going to do it afterwards. So if there is something you just are dying to do, do it before you get into the grind, because then you're going to get into law school, then you're going to get into working in the summers. Then when you graduate, you're going to go straight into bar prep. Then you're going to be starting a job, and then things are just spinning and going round and round, right? And so if there's something you're really hoping to do, sometimes a gap year is a really fantastic opportunity. This is also a great opportunity to pursue different experiences, or again, think about ways that set you apart, or that really allow you to build just your overall profile as an applicant. So I've talked and alluded a little bit to the application persona. So now let's dive into that a little bit more. But essentially with the application persona, it is your theme, right? Like it is if I were to ask the admissions committee how to summarize you in a few words, that's your application persona. So it is I like how they have this here. It's an organizing principle. It's not an accident. It is a very conscious decision that in my personal statement, in my resume, in my supporting documents, I'm going to carry kind of this theme throughout. It's memorable and potentially and hopefully also has a level of persuasiveness to it. And I've worked with students that have a lot of different, application personas. I've worked with students that their experience in technology has been kind of a cohesive component. I worked with a student a couple cycles ago who her personal experience with the legal system was a piece that carried through. I've worked with a student whose connection with financial literacy was the uniqueness that was a part of their persona. So again, there isn't just one way to do it. It's really thinking about what's that common thread about me and my experience that I want to showcase to an admissions committee. Okay, so let's do a little group exercise. So let's pretend that we are all admissions officers at Stanford, so super selective and prestigious law school, and you can only choose one of the following two folks. I'm going to give you all a minute to take a look at the slide of Cindy versus Jane. So if we can advance to that slide, Ellen, thank you. So we've got two folks with solid GPAs and LSATs, Ivy League versus a strong top 30. You've got good involvement and activities, but just take a minute and in the chat, who gets admitted? Okay, we got a vote for Jane. Oh, another vote for Jane. All right. All right, some more for Jane. Okay, you guys are very smart and very perceptive. Good work. Oh, and a vote for Cindy. Now, to be fair, these are both great applicants. Let's start by saying that Cindy and Jane have strong profiles, but Jane did a really good job of showcasing her unique passion for environmental law. And we can go to the next slide to kind of highlight some of this. She has a lot of really great details that support her career goals. Cindy had a lot of similar pre-law experience, but she just didn't quite make the connections in the same way. And so that consistent theme that Jane was able to show is what we would look at like an application persona. Her application becomes a little bit easier to remember because she has that kind of environmental law connection that weaves throughout. So, I mean, like I had mentioned just a moment ago, there's a lot of different application personas out there. There's a lot of different people. And so here are just a couple examples. But again, I think it's important to really think and brainstorm on what not only makes me unique, but what's the story that I want to tell. And one of the benefits of the persona, in addition to, I think, giving some parameters to how you approach your application, I think it can also help you ensure that you are using each component of the application to share different bits of your story, because nothing is more disappointing than an application that just falls super flat, where you're like, oh, I feel like this person had so much more to say, but like they just were so surface level, or they just kind of found new ways to say the same thing but like maybe there's, their why, whatever statement could have talked about a different aspect that connected into their persona, and their, diversity statement could have pulled out another component. So I think they're just really unifying themes throughout. So, I mean, here the takeaway is really, you have to do more outside the classroom to be a strong applicant. You need to tailor your extracurriculars and your professional experiences and all the other things that you do to really reflect your perspective and to reflect you, and really think about how you showcase, again, to be a strong applicant. Again, remember, we're reading for reasons to admit, not reasons to deny. And on the next slide, or maybe 2 slides here, we're going to show some of the schools where a lot of our students have been accepted, which is really exciting. It's always fun. We're actually starting to get into that season with my students with Ingenious who are getting accepted places, and it's lots of fun to get to hear all of the really fantastic things that they're going to be doing. All right, turn it back over to you, Ellen.
Thank you, Lauren. Well, I see we already have some great questions in the Q&A box, so I'm just really quickly going to discuss our programs, and then we'll go ahead and get into these questions, because I know you're obviously very eager to get these responses. So I'll just quickly say we have 3 programs for law school applicants. Starting freshman year of college, we have our candidacy building program, and that's when you're working with a former admissions officer like Lauren and a graduate coach who's a current JD student, and that is early planning and strategy, planning on exactly what we talked about. How are you going to build your application persona from scratch? What clubs are you going to pursue? How are you going to spend your summers? I think, Lauren, I'm not sure the exact phrasing you said, but things that are like set versus not. So when you start candidacy building early, nothing's set, and you can kind of play with everything and just get better results. But then, of course, we also have application counseling. So if you're ready to apply, we're ready to apply with you, and you can work with us, our former admissions officer and graduate coach, on your applications. And then, of course, if you've done all the process yourself, and you just want another set of eyes from a former admissions officer right before you apply, send us your application. We'll provide you with edits, strategy, etc. before you submit. So I'll go ahead and send it over to Lauren. Matthew had a really great question. So he was wondering how admissions officers are considering gaps in applicants' resume. He was very productive in community service for 2 years prior to the pandemic, but his extracurricular portfolio took a hit because of the pandemic. Understandable.
Yeah, I think number one, that's really understandable. I think a lot of students are going to be facing that. What I would think about is if you are still kind of in a position where you haven't returned to, some of the extracurriculars or volunteering or some of those things, is start to think creatively about how to do that. Because I know everybody has different levels of comfort as we are returning, to this post-pandemic world that we're in. And so think about how can you start to get back in the game, so to speak, in a way that you feel comfortable. I think for some students, depending on how stark that gap is, they may think about an addenda that addresses maybe a change in their extracurricular involvement. And that can be just a really simple, these were the things that I was actively involved in, but given the pandemic, certain things just weren't occurring or weren't happening. And, this is what else you were doing. I think it's not, depending on the nature of it and depending on how little you were doing. And I don't want to say that in a bad way, it would really, I think, I think depending on if it was literally just went from doing all to nothing, I would maybe think about addressing it. If there were still some things occurring, I don't know if I would draw as much attention to it, because I think that's just going to be pretty understood and accepted as we think about applications at this time.
And Tess had a really good question as well. So Tess asked, how can they answer the question, what can I contribute to the program? So what kind of answers do you usually see from students?
Yeah. So when I'm reading questions like that or reading responses to that, I'm really looking to get a sense for what makes their perspective unique. What do they add that's different? So for example, I'm working with a student right now that is really interested in data privacy, and he is speaking about there's like a specific technology journal at the school, and there's some classes in this area and a professor doing a lot of research. So one of the things he has spoken about is how eager he is to be involved in these things and how he's excited to broaden his knowledge base, but how he feels like his professional background really brings a perspective beyond just an academic background in data privacy, and how that might really enhance, the classroom conversation. And he's speaking about how that professional experience has really been enlightening to him in ways that he didn't anticipate as a new professional going in. So that's just one example. But it's really kind of thinking about, how do you take it a step further than I want to learn this? Okay, you want to learn this, you want to network with this person, you want to get involved, you want to experience this. How can you, what is it that's in your background or your pedigree that's going to make that, a fruitful experience for the other people with you? And sometimes it can be really general. Other times you might have a really deep connection to something. And that's okay too. I think the biggest thing to avoid in those scenarios is just saying like, I want to go to your law school because you have this program, and that surface level of just regurgitating all of the fantastic things that law school has is definitely far too superficial. But anything you can do that connects to the why do you want to do it, and then even better if you can add the here's how I'm going to enhance the experience for others.
These are all really good specific questions. So the next question is about grad degrees. So this person said that undergrad wasn't the best for them, but they went to grad school for legal and ethical studies and had a 3.8 GPA.
Awesome.
But not all the law schools are looking at have the option of adding in grad experience. So what would you say?
So definitely include it on your resume. Definitely make sure the transcript is sent. It should be sent. And you may specifically want to write an addendum about your academic performance, particularly if it might even just be like, like undergrad wasn't my thing. I was still figuring out life, how to student. Like it can be as simple as that kind of an explanation. But man, I went and got my master's, and that is really where I came into my own. I found a topic I was passionate about. I really got a good sense for maybe time management and study skills, and really draw their attention to how successful you were able to be in that graduate program. But definitely make sure you're including your transcript in your application materials. Definitely make sure you're highlighting your education on your resume. And then if you feel like it needs some additional attention, an addenda. And that is only I guess my caveat would be that's as long as you aren't speaking about it in your personal statement. If for whatever reason you're talking about graduate school in your personal statement, I don't know that I would reiterate it in another space. But if you're feeling like, oh, I haven't had a chance to highlight this, then an addenda would be a great place to do that.
And Griffin is a freshman right now in undergrad. They're majoring in government.
Awesome.
They're feeling good about their grades, about their involvement.
Love it.
But they're not 100% committed to law school. So will it put them in the application if they're, considering other options, and they are international law as their focus of interest?
Would it hurt them in the application if they're not committed to it right this minute? Is that the question?
Well, that's what the question says, but I think maybe, I mean, I would assume in the application, like they do want you to be like 100% like law schools for me, but I don't think not being committed now as a freshman.
Right. No, I don't think
anything,
that's.
yeah, then like exploring their options now is going to make like an even more enriching resume.
Yeah. No, I honestly think exploring your options might make a more unique resume. So yeah, I don't think you're going to hurt yourself at all. When it comes to applying, yes, know what you want. And I'll be honest, I have had conversations with students who are like, yeah, I was applying to law school, but I was also applying for, policy programs, or I was also applying for whatever. And I mean, that's your choice in terms of how you want to spend your time and energy and application dollars, because we all know that those cost money. But no, I think as a first year student, like now is your time to explore. Use this time to figure out what you want to do so that when you get to the point that you're ready to do it, you feel confident that it's the right choice. I would continue to explore legal things, whether that's getting involved with your pre-law organization, maybe try an internship at a law firm over the summer. I think that's going to really either quickly turn you on or turn you off to things, and then you know how to better focus your energies. But getting involved with other things, I think that sounds fantastic. It's just going to make you a more unique applicant.
And Beth had a question in the chat. It's a bit of a longer question, so you might want to read it on your own. But I think the gist of it is that Beth has been involved in an activity since high school, and she's like gone a lot deeper in the activity doing internships and stuff, but would it be okay for her to discuss it in her application if it goes back to high school? Yeah. So, I mean, the rule of thumb is once you get beyond freshman year, you really need to remove high school from your resume and whatnot. But the caveat to that is unless it is really relevant. And it sounds like this level of involvement is insanely relevant, and certainly working with victims in the scenario that you're describing would definitely be something that's relevant. So I wouldn't necessarily shy away from including or talking about that. If the experience was in high school and then it stopped and there hasn't been anything else connected to that, then I think the only thing that I would keep in mind is how much real estate do I want to give it on my application, right? So like if it's an experience that is old, relevant, but very old, it probably only needs a little bit of space. If it's an old experience, but it was the catalyst for other experiences, then that also might look a little bit different. But in terms of, how important it's been in your formation and desire to go into law, I think it definitely deserves some space and some attention. Awesome.
Yeah.
And we're a little bit past 9, everybody, and I don't see any more questions. But if you do think of any questions in like 5 minutes, 5 hours, 5 months, 5 years, you can email us. We're always here. My colleague Jillian's email's at the bottom right there, jillian.shankin@geniusprep.com, but you'll also get an email from us tomorrow with the recording. So feel free to respond to that if you'd like to schedule a free consultation, if you just like to ask some questions over email, if you don't want to like read through our entire blog, but you're like, hey, Ellen, like I want free resources on the LSAT, like don't worry, I'll send them to you. No worries. I have a podcast episode on it. Yeah, so we're here for you. I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar here, but thank you so much for being here, Lauren. I learn something new every time I host one of these. I always get kind of excited at the end. I'm like, oh, I think I should apply to law school. No worries, it's not for me. I'm doing something else. But this was wonderful, everybody. I hope you all have a lovely night. Thank you so much, Lauren.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. I just have to find the end button. That's always the hardest part.
Good to chat with you all. Thank you and good luck.
Sorry, the end button keeps disappearing off my screen. Bye, everybody.